On Business Security Weekly, each week we address the challenges facing CISOs through our guest interviews, including former and active CISOs. Our news segment is focused on leadership and communications to better help security leaders translate and communicate security risks into business risks. Jason Albuquerque, Ben Carr, Tyler Robinson, and others add their expertise to the conversation. I'm Matt Alderman, and I hope you search for Business Security Weekly in your favorite podcast catcher and subscribe to download our latest content.
Welcome back to Identiverse 2024. We are live here in Las Vegas. I'm your host. My name is Ron Eddings, and I have a great guest with me here today. I have Gerry Gebel, who is the VP of Products and Standards at Strata. What's going on? What's going on, Gerry?
Great to be with you here, Ron. Awesome to be here.
It is awesome to see you. Right before we hit record, we were speaking about your relationship with the event. And you said that you go way back. You've been knowing this event. It's been kind of a game changer for you. So tell me about the relationship between you and Identiverse.
Yeah, well, it started out as the Single Sign-On Summit several years ago. And then as it grew and the sort of landscape changed a little bit, then it became the Cloud Identity Summit. And then more recently, it was renamed to Identiverse. So it's been really fun to be part of this whole community that the conference has built over the years. And it's great to see so many friends here and familiar faces as well every year, coming back to Identiverse.
For anyone that's looked you up on Google, they would see that you've been on a lot of events like this. You've spoken on a lot of events like this. You've been on a lot of podcasts, a lot of shows. And they're going to quickly know that you have a lot of experience in the identity space. Looking back, when you first got into identity, what was your entry point, and also what was the state of identity back then?
Yeah, I think like many of us, I started in the security, from the security perspective. And because identity management didn't exist as a distinct discipline, if you will, or even as a market category. So there's probably late 90s, early 2000s is when there was security, and then there was directories. Directories, LDAP directories were basically all identity was about at that time. Yep. And then, once the web really became prevalent, then obviously there was more of a need to address identity specifically. So it sort of, branched out from security and from directory and into its own thing at that time.
I was just mentioning earlier on the stream that my first entry point into identity was Active Directory. Okay. That was why identity was important for me. You look at today, we're more connected than ever. It's all about data. It's all about applications, and identity is having a little bit of a glow up, which is exciting. How would you describe the current state of identity?
It's front and center is what I would say. Mm-hmm. It really has gained prominence, sometimes for the wrong reasons, because of identity breaches or the like. Yep. But I think it's front and center now because it is recognized as such an important aspect of doing business. We want to secure our business, but we also want to enable it. And to enable access and your experience with your applications or your apps and what have you is so much of that is about identity. Knowing who you are, of course, but knowing about you, your preferences, and all of these other aspects. So identity is front and center now. So that feels pretty cool.
When you ask anyone in the cybersecurity space, especially, who are the big players in identity, you always hear Strata. So where does Strata fit in? What do you all do? And, who are the organizations and roles that you're helping support?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Strata was founded, about 5 years ago by some industry veterans, let's say, folks who have been through the different cycles of, security and identity and how that's evolved over the years. I think the impetus for Strata being founded was, almost 5 years ago now. Multi-cloud was really a thing, right? Yep. The impetus to migrate workloads to the cloud, typically the big three platforms, Amazon, Azure, and Google, was well underway. And what we found was that companies weren't just moving to one cloud platform. They were moving to several for different reasons, right? Some workloads here, some there for different reasons. What that meant for identity was now you were multi-cloud and you were also multi-identity, because each of those platforms treat identity in different ways. And oh, by the way, you still have a lot of your legacy environment in your data center using, say, even first generation identity systems.
Right.
So there was a lot of dissonance there, right, between your existing legacy identity infrastructure and now all of this cloud native stuff going on over here. So that really exposed an opportunity to take a different approach, a different perspective in this world. And that's where Strata came up with identity orchestration, as a way to abstract away those complexities from your application so that you can now more easily modernize apps, and in particular modernize your authentication, because that's became such a risk in many ways. But also to give you now the freedom to move, between different kinds of identity providers that you could not do before because you were locked in.
I love the idea of orchestration because it makes things like Legos. Like you're able to compose new workflows based off of your needs, and I would imagine that's one of the core pillars for Strata is allowing organizations to be free, like you mentioned. Who are the roles, like the titles that typically find Strata that bring it to their stakeholders? Which roles it really speaks to? Which roles does Strata speak to most?
Mm-hmm. Well, and there are a lot of them are here at the conference.
Yeah, for sure.
Identity architects. So just like identity management became a thing of its own, now that is also a discipline for a career path, right? So identity architects, security architects, those are probably a key audience profile for folks like us to talk to, for sure.
The team informed me that you all have a new product drop, and congratulations. I wanted to bring that up, hear about it, share it with our audience as well. So what is that product?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for asking. So last week we announced identity continuity.
Right.
So as I described, we have this multi-cloud world and multiple identity services running, and occasionally those cloud services fail. They fail, right? They go down, and now if I can't log in, I can't get to my business applications.
Yep.
So this has become more of an issue for our customers and for the industry at large. That's focusing more on the resiliency of your whole infrastructure. Cloud-based models, typically are 4 nines, whereas historically in a data center that we managed was you shooting for 5 nines of availability. So downtime happens, and with the continuity solution, now you have the ability to recognize when an identity service is no longer available, and now I can fail over to a backup situation and allow for continuous operations of my business. Because businesses recognize they know how much it costs when they're offline, whether I can't build more widgets in my factory, or I can't sell more goods online, or whatever the business that they're in. They know how much it costs to be offline. So with continuity, we're giving them an option that really wasn't available before. Historically, you would think about doing backups, and then you restore that environment to recover, for example. But that can take a long time.
For sure.
And so now we give them what we think is a much better option because of the architecture of the system.
So it sounds like if everything were to break loose, disaster happens, they could go from one provider to another provider with this solution.
That's correct. Absolutely correct.
Are organizations thinking, like that? I would imagine that the conversations are at least happening because we see outages from major players, whether it be Google, AWS. I see it a lot with a tool that I use called Notion. There's outages probably once a month, and these outages happen to be 8 a.m. on a Monday. It's devastating. It's almost like having a breach on a Friday.
Right.
So, what's been the reception by organizations and people at the conference on this new product so far?
It's been universally well accepted because this is, like I said, it's a challenge that they've had inadequate solutions for in the past. In the worst case, you're offline and you just have to wait for your identity service to come back online. That's horrible because you don't know how long the outage is going to be or how complex. Or you have, backups, and that's a viable system to have, right? Belts and suspenders, it's all good, but it takes time to restore that environment again to get it operational. So having something that's more continuous really is a more optimal solution, and people are really responding positively to that.
That's amazing. I think it's always easy, especially as a technologist, to not put yourself close to the customer. If you were to go to a doctor's office and they can't log into their computer because of an identity issue, that's devastating, especially if something were to go down. So I always look at it that way. I'm inspired by, you all that are building the technologies that are going to help support our health, our safety, our wellness. When you look at the organizations that really get excited about Strata, which organizations, do you all typically work with and speak to the heart of?
Well, I think so many industries are uber connected now. You said that earlier, right? We're so connected. Everything is digital. So there isn't an industry really that doesn't have this kind of issue, whether it's manufacturing, of course, the healthcare scenarios that you described, super critical, financial services, they're always very sensitive to downtime. I remember my days working at the bank, that was a very critical metric, the uptime, the availability of systems. So it's really pretty much across the board in government services as well, right? Because, citizens need access to their, state or local or federal services as well. So it's really across the board, across different industries.
Looking at the rest of the conference, what are you most excited to get out of Identiverse?
Oh, a lot of it is personal connections, just seeing people that you see once or twice a year at these kind of events. So that's fantastic. But also just there's, a number of people that always have something interesting to say that I want to make sure I'm at their session to hear that. And I have a session tomorrow also on a panel session where we're talking about some new things happening in the industry. So there are a lot of different reasons.
Can you give us a little peek under the hood of what may be brought up during the panel?
Yes, absolutely. So it actually is a work effort that started here at Identiverse. It's another one of the amazing things that happen at events like this when people can get together and try to figure out how to solve tough problems. So a couple years ago, a group of people got together to talk about authorization and standards in that space. And it sort of fizzled out pretty quickly. But then last year, we got those folks together and some others. And it seemed to be the timing was right to try to address some of the potential standards that could be written for authorization systems. And that led to creating a charter that we submitted to the OpenID Foundation, and we started a new working group there called Authorization Exchange, or AuthZen for short. And since October, we've been working on an initial interoperability specification, which we demonstrated here this week already, yesterday morning. And then, so the panel tomorrow is basically to do a readout of all that, and then also just to describe the other profiles and specs that we'll be working on as a group. So it's incredibly gratifying to be part of a movement like that to help bring some positive changes to that piece of the identity market and to help with interoperability across different products.
I was really excited to meet you because of your experience, not only at this event and in the identity space, but your experience as a technologist as a whole. There's a lot of security leaders here. There's a lot of people that are watching this stream right now. For anyone that wants to be one step better at identity and access management, they don't know where to start. What would be your advice to them?
Well, if you can get justification to come to an event like this, it's a great place to start. I would also give a shout out to the ID Pro organization. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
We produce your podcast. Very familiar.
Yeah. So become a member. It's fairly inexpensive even to be an individual member of ID Pro. and it really helps you get connected with the identity community.
Yep.
So you can have that all year round, not just, when you're here at an event like Identiverse.
Sound advice. Join ID Pro, come out to Identiverse. It's a great time and place. Gerry, it's been an honor and a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much. For anyone that's out there that's listening, watching this stream right now, be sure to learn more about Strata, learn more about Gerry by visiting securityweekly.com/Strata IDV. That's STRATA IDV. And with that, we will see you on the next session.
Hello, I'm Paul Wagenseal with Cyber Risk Alliance here at Identiverse, and we're interviewing Ajay Gupta, who's the CEO of SDG, and we're going to be talking about unlocking business value, navigating identity program challenges with expert insights. So, Ajay, let me ask you, how can organizations define or calculate an identity program's business value?
Well, let's take a step back before
Sure.
we get into sort of the specifics of that question. Identity management has been deployed by a lot of organizations for over 2 decades.
Sure.
And when it really first started out, it was a matter of securing who has access to the network and what assets do they have access to once they get into the network. Over time, and that was largely compliance driven and security driven.
Yeah.
Over time, it sort of melded into governance. But today, identity is really a core tenet of unlocking business value through its integration with business transformation initiatives. And what it's really doing is allowing the interaction between an organization and its employees, partners, and customers to be more rich and be more in context. So the business value really drives from not just eliminating risk or creating operating or providing opportunities for operational efficiency, but really eliminating revenue loss and, more importantly, contributing to revenue gain. And we could go into sort of a lot more detail on the subject, but as customers and partners are interacting with an entity, with an organization, they are providing more and more information to their organization about who they are and how they want to interact with that organization. And that data, number one, creates a little bit of a obligation on the organization to trust, to sort of protect that information and live up to the trust and the privacy of that information that the constituent is placing with the organization. But the second piece is, as these constituents provide more information, it allows the organization to create more of a frictionless experience for these constituents. And as they interact, not only just the entire customer lifecycle, but also the lifecycle of transactions within that customer lifetime journey, that interaction can be enriched through context that the organization learns from this data. And it's all tied to the identity. So that's where, if that is done effectively, it has the ability to really drive a lot of revenue growth for the organization and creating better and stickier relationships with their constituents.
Could you give me an example of how, better identity and governance could unlock business value, could create, better revenue?
For example, let's take the example of a consumer products company or a transportation company.
Sure.
An organization. So when a customer is interacting with, let's say, buying a consumer product, the first piece, when they first register on the website and they create a credential for themselves, if that process has a lot of toll gates and has a lot of friction, that constituent most likely will drop off and go to a competitor.
Yes.
So that process has to be of identifying who that individual is and who they say, and validating that they are who they say they are, has to be frictionless.
Yes.
Once that is done and they procure a product, and they tell the organization more about themselves, about what their preferences are, what their choices are, giving them the right options of what products they should look at is the next step. And then once they procured or bought a product, working with them through the post-sale process and helping them through the challenges that might arise, and then serving them additional products that they could potentially procure. that creates more opportunity for revenue growth for like a consumer products company.
So you're kind of taking the consumer on a bit of a journey there. You're really
Absolutely.
following them. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's more than just logging them in and getting their name.
It's not just identification and authentication anymore.
So it's sort of monitoring and shepherding. That's what you seem to just be describing.
Absolutely, and you have to stay in lockstep with the journey, and you have to, but the obligation of the organizations haven't really changed. You still have to have a deep focus on security and risk because you have to protect this information. Because as soon as you break that trust, that customer is gone. Right. They may not come back.
Sure.
But then the second piece is, as you collect more information, how do you leverage that to increase the richness of the experience?
And how does your solution increase that richness?
So the way we work with our clients is through sort of three phases. In the beginning, we provide expert services and advise clients on how to look at identity as a business transformation engagement.
Sure.
It's not just technology. It's identifying people who can work with our clients who have the right balance of business and engineering or technical skills. At the end of the day, implementing an identity management initiative is a combination of implementing certain technology products, weaving them together, but really building the process engine around that to make sure that transformation goes through. So there's a lot of organizational change management that comes into play, but you have to have the right skills and the right approach to develop that strategy on how this is going to get implemented and work for the organization. Having said that, it's very critical, and from our experience, to ensure that the strategy is not a one-size-fits-all. The strategy has to be tailored to each organization's appetite and ability to operationalize and derive benefits from that execution. So we tailor the strategy based on each organization's ability to actually consume that solution and then operationalize it and get benefit from it. Some might, for some organization, might take them 3 to 5 years to get the full value. Others might be able to do it in 2 or 3 years.
So you're really partnering with these companies in a way, and it kind of parallel to the logging and monitoring and shepherding of the customer. You're also kind of doing this with these companies, and they're your customer, and you're shepherding through this process.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And the reason our clients work with us is because we're able to bring to bear a sort of a variety of experiences from having worked with multiple clients, and seeing different challenges, different problems and how they manifest themselves in various organizations who have different levels of maturity.
Okay, excellent. All right. So, this is interesting. Why are identity programs not just a technology project?
Well, as we just talked about, right? It's really integrated into the business solution. So 20 years ago, it was pretty much a back office IT project. It worked. It wasn't even then, but it worked. But today, especially in the last 10 years, as organizations have moved off-prem and gone to the cloud, and almost every client of ours is undertaking some digital transformation or business transformation initiative, and everything is digital. By definition, that means you have to identify who you're interacting with. Whether it's an employee or a partner or a customer, or sometimes it's a non-human. So you have to understand who's connected to your environment and what they're trying to do on it.
Of course, that makes sense. Now, one thing I've noticed is that we're in 2024, and I think a lot of companies don't realize how quickly a lot of these technologies have advanced in the past 8-10 years, since like 2015. And we have obviously the cloud model, the hybrid model. We also have a lot of SaaS apps, and we also have a lot of remote working from home. How has your company sort of adapted to that and shepherded its customers through that rapid change, a change that many companies are not really even completely aware of how much impact those changes have?
Yeah. So our approach really, or sort of our sort of point of view, is that the basics haven't really changed. It's application of technology to solve business problems.
Okay.
So technology and products evolve, and they've continued to evolve. So specific to identity and access management, so it's not so much about having people who have proficiency in a particular product, but it's understanding the business of identity and access management and what that enables for our clients.
Yeah.
So solving that problem is what we're really using technology. That technology is just a tool.
Yes.
Right. So, 10 years ago, maybe we had folks who were really smart in using a hammer and a nail, and today they're using power tools, but we're still hammering a nail in.
Right. The goal is the same.
The goal is the same.
Yeah.
But what we can do with the technology has evolved, and it might have been a little harder 15 years ago, but it's simpler, but there are additional challenges with the multi-premise approach, the hybrid cloud approach. So those create new challenges, but if you've got a business head on with the right technical skills, that's what enables success.
Okay, great. All right. Now, so what experience and skills are needed to ensure that business value is delivered?
Well, it's a combination of the two, right? So you have to not only have product experts and folks who know how to string together these various products and make them work together, but more importantly, to make that successful, you need folks who understand business process.
Sure.
Folks who understand organizational dynamics, folks who can drive change through an organization, who are comfortable with communicating complex topics in simple language and getting consensus and getting folks to see a new way of doing things. And I think those are really important. Those really drive the success, because technical expertise, I have to say, is sort of relatively easy.
Sure.
The technology is not really the challenge. It's the implementation and operationalization of that technology that's the challenge that we have to solve.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people who are very technical, they fail to see the big picture. And you've got to kind of keep that in mind to see what you're going to do with the technology. What is the goal? The technology forms a path, but you've got to have what's at the end of the path. You have to keep that in mind.
Absolutely. And I mean, and I wouldn't sort of generalize and say technologists don't always see the big picture. I think there are a lot of technologists that do see the big picture. It's just what they're comfortable doing.
Right.
They're comfortable putting technology together, and that's their core competency, and I think that's how they should be leveraged. Sure. But there are other folks who are very comfortable, living in that hybrid world of technology and business, and they play a different role and have a different value proposition to the whole equation. And others are more heavily weighted towards the business side of things and less technical, and they have a different role to play. So you need all three blends as part of the team to make this work.
Sure. Okay. And then, so how can an organization ensure that business, that business value is achieved?
So it's really tying it's really making sure that there's a communication plan within the enterprise. It's making sure that every constituent, every stakeholder understands what the end goal is.
Right.
You've got to have executive commitment to doing something. Identity management initiatives are large, complex, and they touch the entire organization. So if there isn't executive buy-in, it doesn't work too well. You can do it piecemeal, but you're not really going to achieve the goals of the business value that you set out to unlock. So clear definition of what your end goal is, and then getting executive commitment to that end goal is super critical.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because identity management, I think people tend to think of it as cybersecurity, but it's much more than that, isn't it?
Oh,
really,
absolutely.
I mean, compliance, risk, it all plugs into that. Now, how do you tell people? How do you convince potential customers of the enormity of, you said it touches all parts of the company. How do you convince people of that it's more than just cybersecurity?
Well, I think people are realizing it's become a little easier today because a lot of the leaders that we work with, they realize that identity, without having a digital identity and a way to secure that and a way to augment that with context, they're not going to be able to deliver business value. And the business is demanding that. And the worst thing an organization can do is have multiple identity management solutions for different parts of the business, because somebody on the front end realizes that they need identity integrated with business transactions, and another part of the organization thinks it's only good for back office support.
Right.
And now you're going to have conflict. So it just requires a lot of conversation.
Yeah.
And really tying what the identity management technologies and the initiative can do for the business, and making sure that we're truly driving, impacting revenue and impacting brand.
Right.
At the end of the day.
Well, it sounds like you've certainly figured out a way to speak to the C-suite about this stuff in a way that a lot of other companies might not. And anyway, I think we're about out of time. Those are all my questions.
All right.
We've been speaking with Ajay Gupta, CEO of SDG, and you can watch all this and get more information about SDG at securityweekly.com/SDGIDV. Once again, I'm Paul Wagenshill for Cyber Risk Alliance. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul.
All right. Thank you. That was right on time.
Yeah. All right.
Hi, I'm Paul Wagenshill with Cyber Risk Alliance, and we're here at Identiverse, and I'm interviewing Mark Batchelor, who's the CTO and co-founder of Vericent. Now, Mark, can you tell me what Vericent does?
Yeah, absolutely. So Vericent is a fraud intelligence platform for account fraud detection. Specifically, if you think about fraud in general, a lot of the marketplace for the last 2 decades or so has focused on payment fraud, right? So much so that people have built business models around it. They bake chargebacks and things like that into their business model, right? We're a bunch of ex-identity veterans, and for us, it turns out that the account, if you can get into the account, you're going to commit chargeback fraud. That it starts with the account. So we built in a fraud intelligence platform that effectively integrates with your application directly or your identity provider to provide fraud signaling in real time as someone logs in or as they commit a high value identity event in order to orchestrate an outcome for things like, should they MFA the user, should they KYC the user, should they, that type of thing. So that's kind of how we got our start. Honestly, we've been around for a little over 3 years at this point, and we didn't know how to explain what it was we were doing for a while. Lucky for us, the analysts out there decided that we were a fraud intelligence platform.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask you I'm going to ask you some dumb questions here, but just in case
please,
people aren't familiar, what is a chargeback fraud?
Oh, chargeback fraud. At the end of the day, we don't do chargeback fraud, right? But at the end of the day, it's whenever somebody steals a credit card number, for example, and they use it to go buy something, and the credit card company says, we guarantee that you won't have any fraud, right? Somebody has to pay for that thing somebody stole. That's a chargeback, right? And so it's built into all sorts of business models, and there are a ridiculous number of vendors that help with chargeback fraud. We want to sit a layer above that and work on account fraud.
So in other words, the vendor usually has to eat the cost if there's a chargeback.
Yeah, the vendor, somebody somewhere, it's either the vendor, the credit card company, the payment processor, somebody eats that cost. And it's in billions, I believe.
Okay. And for people who don't know, what is KYC?
Oh, know your customer.
Right up.
All right. So KYC, good question, by the way. So for know your customer, one of our core beliefs when we started the company was that there's all the way here on the left side, you've got just usernames and passwords, and I'm going to authenticate somebody and let them in, and I'm not going to care who they are. They knew the password, they get in, right? That's kind of been the status quo for a really long time. Over here, you've got KYC, right? And for KYC, I'm going to run you through a selfie check, and I'm going to scan your passport. I'm going to look at a document. I'm going to make sure they match up, right? It's a good indicator that the person really is who they say they are. Deep fakes, of course, are changing that a little bit. But it's also super high friction. And because of it, it's mostly been used in regulated industries like banking, right? That kind of thing. More and more sort of normal companies are starting to use it, but still it's high friction. So one of our core beliefs is that there's something in the middle, right, that you can do to decide whether or not this is likely the person you're supposed to be working with or the person you think they are without going full KYC. And that's one of the things that our platform does.
So you're trying to find a happy medium.
Something in the middle.
Right? Great. Okay.
Now, good question.
Now, how would you define account platform fraud, and can you provide some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. So platform fraud, the way we sort of define it, is a super boring way to say it is terms of service abuse, right? So think for example, here's just a generic example. Let's say I've got a platform where eBay, well, it's not that generic, but let's say I've got eBay, right? And I'm a seller and I'm trying to sell you something, and I don't ship it to you, for example. That's platform fraud, right? I'm using the platform to game other people that are also on the platform, right? Happens all the time in places where people, where you connect consumers to other consumers, or you connect businesses to consumers. So, the Airbnb stories where I show up and it's not what I thought it was, that kind of thing, right? So that's platform fraud. It's I'm not committing credit card fraud. I'm not committing raw fraud, but what I am doing is I'm using a platform against what the platform was intended to be used for, to defraud other people on the other side of the platform.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So in other words, for example, we have a lot of social media companies that are now have selling, marketplaces built into them.
Oh, sure. Sort of Facebook Marketplace, that kind of thing. Sure.
And I'm sure it's probably more rife with that kind of fraud than maybe even eBay is, because eBay's better,
100%. Yeah. 100%. And another example, let's say that I sell sneakers, for example, and I'm going to trade them to you, and you're going to buy them from me, but you're also going to put money on top of those sneakers because you want them really bad, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's say that I'm going to use the platform to launder money. So I'm going to put up a pair of volleys from the 80s that are pieces of junk, and list them as Jordans or something, and then you're going to come along and stack $200 on top of it. I'm going to get that $200. Well, you just laundered that money, right? You used the platform to launder money, and that's not what it was intended for, right? Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Now, in your opinion, what are some of the most troublesome type of account platform fraud? Troublesome types, that is, and what makes them hard to prevent?
Yeah, so troublesome types. Well, certainly there's the money laundering type stuff, but when you boil it all down to it, right? It gets really simple. It's complex, but the problem is simple. It's the person on the other end isn't the person they say they are, right? Or the person on the other end has given their credentials to somebody else to do something, right? Or it's as simple as their credentials were stolen somewhere else and somebody else acting like them, right? That's what we do, is we detect whether or not this is likely that actual person. And that's, I know everybody wants to talk about things like deep fakes and AI and all that kind of stuff, but there's so much more simple stuff out there, low-hanging fruit that really helps solve the problem, that I think is what, where we should go with it.
You don't need AI voice replication if you just have someone who does good imitation.
A
good impression.
Sure. Well, that, and it's oftentimes the person that is committing that, deep fake or whatever it's going to be, something about them doesn't look normal from what the original user was, right? So user behavior matters. And if you're not following their behavior over time, you can't tell when they break bad, right? So for us, it's all about figuring out when somebody breaks bad, even if they look like the same person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Well, which leads to the next question. I mean, we've seen, new technologies come along. I mean, are there new tactics to go with those technologies, or is it just basically replicating the same old thing?
Oh, yeah, of course there's new tactics. There's always new tactics.
Okay.
There's probably 50 new tactics today, somewhere along the way. But so everybody says that AI is going to help in this space, and we certainly use it. Everybody does, right?
Sure.
But AI, the bad guys already have it, and they're way ahead of us, right? They're way ahead of the entire industry on whether or not, they'll use it for whatever they want at this point, right? So I think what probably really happens, in my opinion, is that the tactics probably don't get more, technical. They probably don't get more advanced, but they probably become more of them, right? Because now some kid in his basement somewhere in Europe can just tell AI, go write me a bot that does credential stuffing against this website, right? it's a super simple attack, right? But I think more of them is where it starts first before it gets super.
It's lowering a threshold in a way.
Because, like I said before, I think everybody's worried about deep fakes, and they all talk about it, and it's a thing.
It sounds
right?
sexy.
It sounds super sexy, and I agree, it's really a thing, and it will be a thing.
Yeah.
But at the moment, I'm more worried about the kid in his basement that got ChatGPT to write him a bot that could credential stuff some website. You know what I mean? I think there's going to be more of that in the near term.
Yeah, it's scary how easy it is to do that. I try to do it. I was writing a story about it. I'm like, okay, let's see what we can do.
I've even done it. Yeah. Well, I use it all the time.
Yeah, and it's like, it doesn't give you the whole thing.
Yeah.
But it gives you 2 or 3 different parts.
Get you close enough.
Put them together.
Yep.
You're done.
Yep, for sure.
All right. So the next question is, what kind of guidance do you have for organizations that are trying to balance more robust fraud prevention with a seamless end user experience?
So I think it starts with visibility, right? And I think that a lot of companies have done really well plugging their back-end systems into SIM platforms and that type of thing, right? But on the account side of the house, and one of the reasons we exist is identity events in particular hold a special place in the user's flow because A, you're interacting with the user, but B, they're high risk at the end of the day. And so I think being able to visibly see what's happening with my application with user behavior for authentication and high-value identity events, along with detecting things like account sharing and multi-account abuse and even credential stuffing, I think that's where it starts, right? Where it goes next, though, is also something we do, is getting these events, creating all this signaling, but then taking action on the signaling in real time in order to orchestrate a friction-free or the most friction-free outcome you can based on the posture of the user, right? And that's what our platform does, is ultimately based on all this signaling, I can decide what I should do next. Should I KYC them? Should I MFA them? Should I deny them access? Should I send them somewhere else, right? And it all starts with signaling and visibility.
So what kind of signals are you looking for?
Oh, we look at hundreds of signals. Signals about, just some examples, if it's an email address, for example, of course we're looking at breaches, but we're also looking at simple stuff like how old's the domain? When was it registered? Is it parked? Does it have a valid MX record or an A record? Should I even send email to it, right? We look at IP address information. We watch behavior and circadian rhythms for the user over time to figure out whether or not this particular moment in time is an anomalous event for this user, right? And so we're looking at all that type of signaling, and we build out an identity graph in the background to figure out how users are connected to other users on your platform to decide whether or not they look exactly the same. So is Mark actually Mark, or is Mark also John over here, right? That kind of thing.
Just sort of fit the same profile, in other words.
Yeah, and we've got some tech that we call signal printing that ultimately the premise is that everybody on the internet's carrying signals with them, IP address information, email information, that kind of thing. You can build hundreds of attributes about each one of those little pieces. We use those attributes to create a unique fingerprint for that user. Right. And so using signaling, we're doing fingerprinting for users.
And if you can't find that many attributes, is that itself a red flag?
Often. Matter of fact, anymore, somebody who hasn't been in a breach is often way more sketchy than somebody who's been in multiple, because it's likely they aren't a real person, right?
That's a great kind of a negative filter, I guess you could say.
We use it all the time.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, if you haven't been in a breach, you're probably not a person, right? Yeah.
Okay, so looking ahead, what kind of innovations do you think are going to be happening in fraud prevention and detection in the next 5 or so years?
Yeah, look, I think with AI and with just machine learning in general, and the breadth of data we can get about these things, signaling by itself is going to take off super heavy, right? Yeah. And innovations in that space, using things like identity graphs to figure out who people are, and 7 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon kind of thing, right? Is going to just get better.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big piece of it. I also think that there's probably a future where you can integrate with a platform like ours and just put it in autopilot, right? Right now, most people wouldn't do that. Right now, they'd want to, trust but verify, right?
Sure.
And, write their own rules. But in the future, there's probably a scenario where, look, I'm going to send you these identity event data. They're going to expect us to find the needles in the haystack, and they're going to expect our platform just to take action on them automatically, right?
So remediate things as well.
Yeah, remediate, apply friction automatically without having to know what happened first, right? There's probably a future like that. I think we're a couple years out from it. Really,
kind of more of a fully comprehensive detection and response system. In a way.
Yeah. Right now, there's a lot of people involved in it, but I could certainly see in the future checking that box that says manage my stuff.
Yeah. Well, that seems to be where the cybersecurity industry in general seems to be going.
Yeah,
more
100%.
consolidation, more umbrella platforms, as it were. Anyway, that's all the questions we have. I've been speaking with Mark Batchelor, who is a CTO and co-founder of Vericent. My name is Paul Wagenseal from Cyber Risk Alliance, and you can watch this interview and find out more about Vericent at securityweekly.com/VeroSintIDV. In other words, VeroSintIDV. Thank you very much.